In the past year or two, SBI has seemed to change their vision away from open world PvP for small groups and solos and into more instanced arenas. In my experience, solo hard flagging in the Royals is one of the few experiences left that is positive for solo open world PvP. So that's what this guide is all about, teaching you how to get that good solo PvP and solo ganking action by hard flagging in the Royals without getting constantly swarmed and killed by blueberries. So the first and definitely most important part of becoming a successful red zone ganker is understanding the mentality of the people you're up against. And so there's really two big aspects of this. There's skull chasing and then their general mentality. So for skull chasing, pretty much everybody who's in the Royals who has any interest in fighting will instantly go to investigate a death on the map. Whenever you kill someone, a skull pops up, everybody sees it, and everyone who has any interest in fighting will instantly go there to try to get involved in that fight. What this means for you is that you have maybe 30 seconds before the entire map is on your ass after you get a kill. So after you kill someone, loot up fast and get out of there as soon as you can. After I get a kill, I always change maps just to be safe. This is especially important to remember when you're fighting outnumbered. So example, I've taken a lot of 2v1s where I kill the first person and I could continue the fight and kill the second person, but instead of doing that, if you want to survive, you really just have to ignore the second person and get out. That second person that you might be able to kill 1v1 is not going to be 1v1 for very much longer, as everyone's going to be coming to investigate and they'll instantly just try to kill you as well. The second really important thing is just the general blueberry mentality, and this is a super important thing to understand if you're going to be successful. So the general mentality is this: if a blueberry sees a red, they want to kill that red. And this is true for pretty much every single person on that map. It doesn't matter if they're doing solo dungeons or if they're in a gank group or even if they're gatherers, they want to kill you when they see you. However, they want to kill you. This doesn't necessarily mean that they want to fight you. So most of them won't actually engage with you unless they are certain that they'll be able to kill you. A blueberry will not engage you unless they think that they have an overwhelming advantage. Now the way that they normally achieve this is through numbers. They won't really fight you 1v1 and they'll just wait until more and more blueberries show up until it's 1v7, 1v8, 1v9, 1v20, and then they'll dismount and try to catch you and engage you, because then they're certain that no matter what, they're not going to die and they'll be able to kill you. Personally, I like to think of this as a threshold. They will not attack you unless they reach that threshold of an overwhelming advantage. In order to take advantage of this mentality, you have to be very careful about the gear that you wear. Now before we go exactly into what items you should be using, let's talk about the tier of gear that you want to use. Now remember, a blueberry will not engage with you unless they're sure that they have an overwhelming advantage against you. However, you can use this to your advantage because newer players that are often going to be in the Royal Continent, typically overestimate the effect of high tier gear versus things like experience in PvP and specialization. For you, this means that if you wear like 4.1 gear, that threshold of them thinking that they have an overwhelming advantage is going to be significantly lower than it would be if you were in like your normal tier 7 or tier 8. This is, I think, the biggest mistake that people make when they try to solo hard flag in the Royals for the first time, is that they know they're going to get swarmed, so they want to make sure they're in high tier gear and have like an undead cape or something so that they can guarantee or at least help them escape from the hordes of blueberries that are going to be chasing them. Really, all this does though is it raises the threshold for how willing people are going to be to engage you. So you're really never going to get anyone willing to fight you unless they have like 100 of their friends next to them. By going out in 4.1 gear, on the other hand, people will look at you and think you're a shitter and be so willing to dismount and fight you compared to if you're in high tier gear. So really, if you want to get fights that are even close to fair in the Royals, go in 4.1. It is by far the best way to get fights that are 1v1, 1v2, 1v3. Any tier higher than that, and no one's going to fight you without at least 2, 3, 4 friends. Now, while this does make it objectively more difficult to kill things like gatherers and other people that aren't interested in fighting you at all, I can guarantee you that it is worth it. It is very rare to miss a kill on a gatherer because your IP isn't high enough, and even if they do escape, it's a low price to pay compared to all the attention you get if you wear higher tier gear. Moving on to the specifics of your build now, essentially you can play really whatever you want, but you're going to need your build to be good at a few things in order to be really successful. So first and foremost, you really need high movement and mobility. Pretty much if you want to be able to kill anybody, you're going to need to be able to close the gap to get on top of them and then still chase them down. So if you don't have higher mobility than them, you almost have a 0% chance of killing them if they don't want to fight you. More than this though, you want to choose builds that can move around freely while they're fighting, have a sort of movement and mobility during the fight. For example, if you think of a warbow versus a normal bow, you could have the exact same build and the exact same skill set on both builds, but a warbow just naturally is able to move around much more because they deal damage in short bursts, whereas a normal bow just has to sort of sit there and auto attack if they really want to do damage. In the open world, you need to be able to be moving constantly to reposition when you're fighting multiple enemies or to chase people down, and so all of your builds should favor this sort of playstyle where you can do damage while you're moving. Second, your build really needs some catch potential. If you want to catch any like solo dungeoners or anyone on their mounts, you need to be able to close the distance and then dismount them quickly, and same thing for gatherers, especially if they're on oxes and stuff. You need to be able to quickly close that gap and get on top of them and make sure you get them in combat or get them dismounted, or else they're simply just going to be on their mount and be able to get away for free. Lastly, you really need a way to escape when you're doing solo PvP in the Royals. While this guide should help you not get swarmed as much, it will still happen. Anytime you get a kill, you're going to get swarmed by blues, so really you need a way to be able to escape. Now obviously mobility will help with this, but often it's not enough. Usually you need something more than just having high mobility on your weapon and build. So let's quickly go over an example build that you could use. So in my experience, I've sort of found a holy trinity of helmet, chest piece, and shoes that works really well for a lot of different weapons. First, you have the Guardian helmet on your helm, Assassin jacket for your chest piece, and leather shoes using Refreshing Sprint for your boots. Guardian helmet is just super powerful in the open world. I'll link a video in the description where I go over just how powerful Guardian helmet is. It helps you escape in so many situations where you otherwise wouldn't be able to, and it's also good for duels and fighting. It's just an amazing item. It is getting nerfed. By the time you're watching this video, it probably is nerfed to give it a little bit of a lower shield at high health, but again, it's still very powerful. If you don't want to care about safety as much, Fiend Cowl is very good for purging things like boots off of people you're trying to chase down, allowing you to chase them down much easier. Assassin Jacket is just the perfect chest piece to wear. It allows you to stealth, to catch people easier, especially gatherers when you're on the edge of the screen. You can get a lot closer with Assassin Jacket than you otherwise would be able to, so it helps catch. It also helps escape very well, as you can sort of just sit in stealth to buy time for your sprint and other mobility skills to get up. Lastly, Refreshing Sprint on shoes is just the perfect ability because it gives you that catch potential with a very fast sprint, but also gives you extra mobility by putting all your other mobility spells on lower cooldowns, giving you just greater overall mobility than someone on like a normal run ability. For weapons, really you have lots of options. The main thing that you want to make sure for when choosing a weapon is that it has inherent mobility on it. Either your E or your W has to be some good mobility spell. For example, one of the most successful weapons that I've used is the one-handed spear with a torch offhand, as it has good mobility on the E, it has good counter mobility on the Q, and the W if you go cripple, allowing you to cripple gatherers or cripple people that are trying to chase you, as well as E constantly to space them, and throw Qs behind you to slow them down, or in front of you to slow down gatherers who are trying to run away. Other good examples of weapons that I've personally used and have been successful are Warbow, Black Hands, Bloodletter, Double-Bladed Staff, Occult Staff surprisingly, and One-Handed Frost, and then I'm sure many more could work as well. As long as it has mobility on it and some way to fight while moving, it should be a great weapon. Now obviously you can sort of edit this build however you want, especially if you're planning to target specific types of people. Going harder into certain things and less into other things can be very helpful. For example, if you just want to target gatherers, having stealth, for example, you can maybe switch to Spectre shoes to get right on top of them without any chance of them seeing you, rather than having a short stealth like Assassin Jacket. So stealth is very good for ganking gatherers. If you want to maybe target solo dungeoners, you would want to build maybe that's a little bit harder in its ability to catch and dismount people. However, pretty much no matter what build you go, your food and potions are almost always going to be the same. For food, I would highly suggest going omelets with every single build. Often people don't realize how much mobility going things like omelets can actually give you. Mobility is, as I mentioned, so important for solo open world PvP, and if you have a very high mobility build, going CDR makes that so much higher. Having omelets gets all of your mobility spells just up faster and allows you to chase down things like gatherers who also have really high mobility that aren't going to be on things like omelets. Trust me, you're going to have a lot of people that you're going to need to chase down, and omelets are a really big part in being able to successfully do so. Not to mention, you can say the exact same thing about escaping. In order to escape, you need high mobility, and having those loop cooldowns is a must. For potions, I always take poison potions. They're really important for allowing you to dismount people easier and allows you to have sort of a ranged attack to interrupt people trying to mount up. If you're just a little bit too far, you can throw a poison potion and interrupt them trying to mount up, so that's really important. If you really want to like get into more fights and maybe dive dungeons or something, you could do something else, maybe like healing potions, but really if you're trying to catch people in the open world, poisons are definitely the way to go. Now, the second thing that you need to know in order to be successful at red zone ganking is the types of enemies that you're going to be up against. You really need to know what you're up against as soon as you see someone, and so I've separated them into 3 convenient groups. People who want to kill you, people who you want to kill, and people that don't really matter. They're not going to bug you and you don't really want to kill them. Let's start with the people who want to kill you, the people that mostly you're going to want to avoid. First and foremost, we have blueberry gank groups. This is essentially players in large groups, at least 5-6 players and upwards of 20 that are not flagged in pure catch and CC gear, trying to gank all the hard flag players. These players suck. They're the worst in every aspect of the word. I do not like these people. They make your life very difficult. Essentially, if you see these people, just leave. Whenever I see a player not flagged in pure catch gank gear, I just switch maps, jump in a road, jump in a dungeon until they leave, whatever. They have way too many people for you to fight, and they're in CC and mobility gear, so you can't really escape from them either. Second, we have faction groups, people doing outposts and faction warfare. This is especially prevalent during the bandit assault. Mostly, these people will ignore you a lot more than the blueberry gank groups. They'll only really chase you around if they have nothing better to do, or they're really thirsty, but for the most part, you just want to avoid them, get away from them. They probably won't chase you for too long, and they generally don't have that hard catch gear, so you just want to run away from them when you can. Next, we have other hard flagged gankers. Normally, you can generally tell how big the group they are based on the number of reds in the zone. There'll be obviously one for you, and then usually they travel in groups of at least 3 or 4. There can be other solos which can be fun to fight, but that's very rare. There are also a lot of corrupted dungeoners in the worlds in the red zone searching for dungeons that they can go into, stalkers or slayers. For the most part, you want to avoid these people. They are in PvP gear, 1v1 PvP gear to be specific. If you use a lot of your resources to try to catch and dismount them, they can very easily just turn around and kill you. The smart play when it comes to corrupted dungeoners is to not actively seek them out, but if they come looking for you, then you can decide whether you want to fight them or not based on how many other people are around and what their build looks like. Lastly, in the people who want to kill you category, we have just the general category of random blueberries. This is essentially everything else that doesn't fit into one of those categories of people who are just unflagged walking around. There's really just a lot of people that I personally cannot tell what they're doing out there, but in my experience, a lot of them do want to kill you. Okay, for our next category, we have people who you want to kill, essentially your targets. And the first and largest category of these is your open world farmers. So this is majority of gatherers, but it also includes open world PVM activities, mainly the ghost towns people farming for arcane essences. This is sort of your main target group because, for one, they're vulnerable, they're out in the open world, often dismounted doing their activity, and 2, they have loot on them, so they can be quite good and valuable kills. Not to mention the ones farming the ghost towns and stuff can actually lead to some fairly fun fights. Next, we have solo dungeoners. These are essentially people that are doing solo dungeons. You're generally not going to be diving solo dungeons as a solo. You can do it as a duo very easily, but if you're solo, you're not going to be diving. You're just going to be finding them in the open world on their way to their next dungeon. These can be really good people to gank and often can lead to good fights. Lastly, we end the same way we did with the people who want to kill you, with random blueberries. These people will want to kill you, but they're also good targets oftentimes. And so in my experience, these are actually some of the best fights you get in the Royals are against these random blueberries. And lastly, very quickly, just people who don't really matter. Transporters are sometimes surprisingly on this group, but typically speaking, if you're solo, you can't really dismount a transporter on a good mount. You know, someone on an ox is almost impossible to dismount by yourself. And even if you do dismount them, they have just an insane amount of escapability in their builds, so really your chance of killing them is 0. We also have group dungeoners. These people kind of want to kill you sometimes, but mostly in my experience they just want to get to their dungeon, and you can't really kill them because they're in a large group with a good comp. Okay, now that we know your opponent's sort of playstyle and mindset as well as your build, it's important to go over how you're actually supposed to play in order to get these successful kills and ganks off. So when you enter a zone, look for the area of interest such as the gathering node or a ghost town or areas you think people are doing soul dungeons, and move towards that mounted. Once you're far enough from the gate that you think you could reasonably kill someone before they get to the gate, dismount and start walking towards that area. You want to make sure you're dismounted because if you're mounted, there's almost no way you'll actually be able to dismount and catch someone in time, and they'll probably just run away or stay mounted around you waiting for more of their friends. So really you just want to dismount and then start walking towards areas of interest and keep your eyes at the edge of your screen in the direction that you're moving. This will allow you to see people as soon as possible when they show up on your screen. Now as soon as you see a name tag, depending on if it's mounted or dismounted, you're going to have a different reaction. For dismounted players, that means that they're doing some activity, gathering a node or killing a mob, so you're going to use your assassin jacket right away to close the distance just a little bit more before they can see you. Once your assassin jacket breaks, then you can either use a sprint or a mobility spell into them and tag them before they can mount up. So for example, when I enter a gathering node, I always have my finger on the R button, really ready to hit my stealth as soon as I see that name tag. For mounted players, on the other hand, you can stealth and hope that they walk into you, but I usually just press my sprint instead, sprint at them, and then if they're close enough for me to catch, then I'll throw a poison and try to dismount them. Now, really importantly, if you want to get kills and find these good targets, you literally just have to sprint at every single mounted player that you see and then inspect them as you're trying to dismount them to decide whether or not you should actually be dismounting that person or not. The mentality really is gank first, ask questions later. A lot of the times you inspect them and they're like a tier 8 corrupted dungeon player or a blueberry ganker with friends imminent behind them, and you just have to turn around and go into escape mode instead. This brings us to the next point about the importance of group dungeons. You're going to have a lot of times where you're just being chased by a lot of people on your mount, and so there's different ways to escape, such as zoning to another zone or zoning to the outer roads, but one of the really good ways can be zoning into a group dungeon because it's very dangerous for people to follow you. Most of the time this means that they won't follow you and it's just an easy escape that are all over the place in the map, but if they do, you can use the mobs to help you fight large groups by yourself, especially if you're in the build that I suggested with the Assassin Jacket and Guardian Helm. You can use Assassin Jacket to drop the mob aggro, forcing them to attack the enemies, and you can use the Guardian Helm to execute people through damage. Really, this is just a helpful way for you to be able to win fights and kill people that you otherwise wouldn't be able to against larger groups. Another really nice thing about dungeons is that you can use them if you're dismounted to invis bait by going to the mouth of the dungeon and then going invisible, and people will think you have gone into the dungeon when really you just went into stealth. This is really helpful for either escaping large groups that all get baited into the dungeon, or isolating maybe 1 or 2 people that you're in combat with and trying to kill them before the other ones have realized you've bamboozled them and zoned back out. If you're interested in this sort of like dungeon baiting playstyle, it can be very good. I'll put a link to Eckwart's channel in the description below. He does a lot of this on his streams and videos, and he's very, very good at it. Okay, another thing you're going to know to be successful at solo open world PvPing in the red zone is what zones to go to and which ones not to go to. So the zones that you're hunting at depends on what you want your main targets to be. So for example, if you're targeting solo dungeoners, maybe you have a duo and you're trying to dive dungeons and find solo dungeoners outside of their dungeons, then you're going to want to go to the tier 7 zones in the worlds, because those are the highest tier solo dungeons, or the tier 6 zones that are closest to a town. In these zones you'll be most likely to find solo dungeoners. If you want to maybe target open world farmers, you're going to look on the map for zones that have either resource nodes or ghost towns. Other good zones can be the 4 that are diagonally adjacent to Caerleon. They have those silver conditional PvP areas that spawn a chest on the hour every hour, which can often lead to some nice little small scale fights. There are also some zones that you really want to avoid, specifically the 4 zones just outside of Caerleon. These zones will have a ton of people that are looking to do corrupted dungeons, so they're very dangerous, as well as just a whole whackload of other people. They're very populated, and there's going to be a lot of people who are willing and very ready to PvP and kill you, so my suggestion would just be to avoid them completely. Also, another thing to keep in mind is when the bandit assault is active, make sure you just take a quick look at the map to see where the bandit assault groups are at, because you typically want to avoid those ones, as they can be quite dangerous as well. The last thing you really have to keep in mind for solo PvPing in the red zone is the time of day. Now, this is actually sort of counterintuitive, but the best times that I've found to solo gank are during prime time and not during the dead hours. So during prime time, which is approximately 14 to 20 UTC, the royals are much more populated, meaning you have much more targets in sort of the obscure areas and less populated zones. It is going to be a little more dangerous, as there are going to be more blueberry gank groups around, but they mostly stick to the really popular high density zones like the tier 7 ones and the ones sort of around Caerleon or nearest to the cities. So if you just stay away from these zones, you'll still be able to find quite a lot of people because it is prime time, and you won't have to worry as much about those annoying groups that are trying to kill you. On the other hand, if you try to do this like after 0 UTC or something, when the game is the most dead, you're not going to find many people in the obscure zones, and you're going to have to go to the more popular ones where there are still a lot of blueberry gank groups around, and so it's still very dangerous for you. Okay, so that's pretty much all you need to know to go hard flag solo in the red zones and gank people in solo PvP. I hope you learned a lot from this video, and I hope you find it helpful. As always, if you like the content, make sure you subscribe.